This is all such simple yet sagely advice, but it is still quite a lot to remember in the day-to-day bustle that is our lives, and events move fast in the process of relating to each other. The one golden rule of thumb that we should each use, Dr. Julian Short says, is this: always, always behave as if you believe that people like you. That's good advice, but for many of us, perhaps those with more cautious natures, or those who bring with them repeated experiences of rejection and belittlement, then maybe we would find that hard. Surely it's better to have our guard up, be wary, testing the waters before we let our guards down and risk friendship. We very often don't feel safe by being so open and vulnerable. It is why so many of us would rather risk being seen as unkind in refusing money to someone begging in the street than responding to such a request positively and then being robbed in the process. It seems we would rather be seen as mean than gullible. And that is because being gullible is seen as vulnerable and has connotations of weakness to it, while meanness carries with it a sense of power and control. And we humans fear so much losses of power and control, and that dreadful sense of vulnerability that it leaves us with. A few months ago, I went horse riding. I rode a lot as a child and a teenager, but I hadn't ridden for 20 years. And while riding a horse is a lot like riding a bicycle, that is, that you never forget, techniques have changed enormously in the 20 years since I last rode. Back then, the formal English style dominated, and it was one in which you held the horse on a very tight rein and kept him there until you were absolutely convinced you could trust him. And then and only then would you loosen up and give him a bit of rein. Now, the Western style of riding, or natural horsemanship as it is described, is gaining a foothold in the equestrian world. As I climbed onto my unsuspecting steed a few months ago, I was instructed by my teacher to let the reins go completely loose and to relax into the saddle. I must have looked terrified because she said, "We do things very differently now. I'm going to ask you to do something completely counterintuitive. Just trust the horse, unless he gives you a reason not to. I know you've never met him before, you've never met me before, and it goes completely against the grain, but trust him. We found it usually works better that way." It was a very uneasy hour, but it was an extremely enlightening ride for me. It did work well. The horse did not want to cause me any harm, as most horses do not want to cause their riders any harm. But it did feel strange. And what is true of horses is also sometimes true of people. If you treat someone who does like you as if she likes you, you can consolidate a friendship, the best of all possible outcomes. Treat someone who likes you as if he doesn't, and you'll lose a friend, the worst of all possible outcomes. Respond with aggression to someone who doesn't like you, and you're probably about even, but you're hardly a winner because aggression signals vulnerability. And act as if you believe someone likes you when in fact she doesn't. If you do act as if you believe you are liked, even if it turns out that you are not, you can protect and even strengthen your own self-respect. Are you a bigger fool if you look gullible or if you attack and lose a friend? Consider this exchange. Sue and John are colleagues. Sue compliments John on his tie. Unfortunately, Sue is in fact mocking him, making fun of his taste. Despite the disconcerting awareness that he may be the object of fun, John replies, "Thanks, Sue. That's really kind of you." Now Sue is in a spot. She shot an arrow, but it missed. Sure, she can go to a mutual friend and chuckle that John really believes his tie is acceptable, but it's pretty small stuff. John has started to force her hand. "Yes," she quips, "it goes with the colour of your eyes." Given that his tie is yellow and purple, he's now getting a very clear idea of her motive. But this is actually quite calming, because the uncertainty is fading, and he knows better where he stands. However, he persists in the same dignified vein. "Well, I didn't realise that purple and yellow suited my eyes, Sue, but I'm delighted that you like my tie." Sue is really in trouble now. He's taken control and she really has no option but to declare her hand. To be honest, John, I think your tie's foul. This may not be reassuring, but it is actually easier to deal with than the uncertainty of not knowing what an exchange means, and it certainly puts power in John's hands. If someone is truly putting you down, turning the other cheek has great potency, smiting your enemy much more mightily than abuse or a blow. Now in control, John is in a good position to calmly respond. Well, Sue, sorry you don't like it, especially since I've always admired your taste in clothes. Game, set and match to John. The story illustrates that by always acting as if you are liked, you can at worst leave in a neutral position, and you might even earn grudging respect. To live an intelligent life, we need to act with fairness, kindness and dignity as much as we possibly can. We need to understand that once our immediate physical needs are taken care of, every waking hour we are alive is devoted in one way or another to the ultimate goals of getting as much love as possible, while simultaneously getting as much of our own way as possible. We need to understand that everyone else is doing exactly the same thing, and that every hurt we suffer is an assault of one of these two things. Our sense of belonging is threatened and we feel rejected. Our sense of individuality is threatened and we feel belittled. We need to know that when we must choose between belonging and individuality, it is nearly always best to choose belonging. And when our individuality takes a bruising, we must do something creative to restore our integrity and dignity. And above all, we must always, or at least as much as is humanly possible, act as if we believe that people like us. I will conclude with a personal story. When I finished my ministerial training in the north of England 10 years ago now, I applied for my first ministry in Richmond in West London. The selection process was drawn out, to say the least. There were 3 trips down to London and various long-distance telephone conversations. Then one Sunday afternoon, after I'd taken my last service in my student pastorate in the north of England and had a lovely party, I left what had been our home for the past 2 years and taken the train to London to stay with friends. The congregation in Richmond that day had seen their final of 3 candidates, and they were to vote on who of the 3 candidates they wanted to be their minister. At about 9 o'clock that night, the secretary rang me and told me that I had been the successful candidate. I was overjoyed. But, he said, it wasn't unanimous. Not everyone wanted you. There were 8 who didn't. Thank you very much for that feedback, I said. And always one to see the glass as half empty rather than half full, I rang my friend in the north of England. And while she was so excited about me getting the job, I was focusing on the 8 who hadn't voted for me. I wonder who they are, I said. It doesn't matter, she said. Yes, it does, I said. No, once you get there and get on with it, you'll forget all about it. No, I won't, I said. Act as if they all like you, she said, and you'll forget. I doubt it, I said. Anyway, I got there. I acted as if they liked me. After all, what did I have to lose? And I did forget, completely. And 6 busy years later, as I stood giving my emotional farewell service, just as I was coming up to the benediction, I suddenly thought, for the first time in 6 years, I never did find out who that 8 were. I still have no idea. It doesn't matter. And it is honestly, the first time I've thought about that in 6 years. And then I quickly said, Amen. Always act as if you believe people like you. Make them work really hard to prove to you otherwise. Amen.